Over the last year, Israel has been assaulting Iran and its axis of resistance with deadly effect. All this came to a head in the last few weeks with a bombing campaign against Iran joined by the United States. Will the next step be regime change in Iran? We talked about this at the Aspen Ideas Festival with a high-powered panel. Susan Rice, National Security Advisor under President Obama, John Bolton, National Security Advisor in the first Trump administration before a high-profile split with the president, and General David Petraeus, a former CIA director who also led Allied forces in Iraq and Afghanistan.
I thought I'd begin, Dave, with you by asking you the Middle East that you dealt with when you were in Iraq in the early years after 9/11, almost 25 years ago. How different is the Middle East of today from that Middle East?
Well, it's transformed enormously. And of course, after Iraq, I was the commander of U.S. Central Command, so we owned the greater Middle East and then Afghanistan and so on. But this is dramatically different. The last 18 or more months have seen that. Iran has had tremendous degradation to its security forces of all type, not just the Artesh, the traditional military, but also the Revolutionary Guards Corps. Many of their leaders have been killed, well over a dozen of their scientists when it comes to the nuclear program. They're essentially defenseless right now. And then you have Israel really as the preeminent military power in the region, but with a very different strategic outlook. We have to really appreciate how significant 10/7 was in terms of convincing Israel that they can never allow a threat to develop, not just on their border, but in the region as well, in the face of Iran. The Gulf states are dramatically and much more important. They're hubs of innovation, developing sectors beyond fossil fuels. They're anticipating the India-Mideast corridor, and then the U.S. is still there. Try as we might, leaving the Middle East for the United States is like Michael Corleone trying to leave the mafia. You just keep getting sucked back in.
All right, let's hold on that for a second, and let's drill down on the big subject, which is, of course, Iran. John Bolton, when you have had a complicated relationship with Donald Trump.
It's not complicated.
And on the days when you guys weren't getting along, he would talk about crazy John Bolton. All he wants to do is bomb Iran. But then he ended up bombing Iran. Did you do the right thing?
Partially. You know, Trump doesn't follow strategy or policy. What he does at any given moment is always up in the air. His decisions are like a vast archipelago of dots. You can try and draw lines between them, but he can't. So I can only say what I think, and that is what Dave said is about the situation in the Middle East post-October the 7th is exactly correct. To me, this is the moment to finish off the Iranian nuclear weapons program, which I think we have the capacity to do. And most importantly, the key that has to take place before there's going to be real peace and stability in the Middle East long term. The regime in Tehran has to be overthrown by the people of Iran, and I think it's doable. I think the regime is weaker than at any point since the 1979 revolution, which I'd be happy to go into at length. But I think we will never have an opportunity this good to remove not just the nuclear program, but the Iranian support for terrorism, which dates back to 1979 when they seized our embassy employees, and it went downhill from there.
Susan Rice, regime change in Iran?
Color me skeptical that the population will successfully overthrow the regime anytime soon. Ironically, Israel and the United States bombing Iran may have had the unintended consequence of dimming opposition internally, because there's quite a bit of evidence that many regime opponents, among the most outspoken, reacted as one might expect when their country is bombed by an outside entity, not to rally around the regime, but to rally around the country and the national identity. And I don't think that advanced the objective of peaceful regime change or internal regime change. When I say peaceful, I mean not imposed from outside. But on the nuclear program, I think the resort to military action when diplomacy had not been exhausted was a strategic mistake. It has long been the objective of every American administration, Democratic and Republican, to ensure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. That has got to be our objective. The question and the debate has always been on how best. And the reality is, and we're back to this point today, only diplomacy and a negotiated settlement can ensure the sustainable and verifiable dismantling of Iran's nuclear program. You need inspectors on the ground. You need verifiable constraints that are very significant. And you don't achieve that by ripping up the 2015 nuclear agreement and replacing it with nothing. Trump had an opportunity, I think, before military action of using the threat of military action and the continuation of sanctions to get potentially an even better deal than in 2015. And we lost that opportunity as a result of military action that I think proceeded when it was necessary, when diplomacy had proved that it could not succeed. And as a result, we don't know, and we may not know, as we didn't in North Korea for many years, if Iran goes underground and rushes to try to create, whether it's a crude device or a more sophisticated device. And we may end up inadvertently with the outcome that we have long sought to prevent.